Thank you, Luke, and greetings all. And for those of you who are standing in the back, there aren't many seats available, but you should feel free to come on down and make yourself comfortable. It is terrific to be here. I love coming to Australia. Otherwise, why would I fly 28 hours this weekend to be able to make it? But I do come about twice a year, and I always find it exciting because people are both energized, they're articulate, they're willing to take, frankly, some risks, but they also understand that their businesses desperately need returns, that you need to be able to deliver the outcomes for all the stakeholders and all of the constituencies. And that's when it comes down to that, innocent but often maligned set of words, digital transformation, where people wonder, what does it mean? Because it's so easy to stamp that on anything. Well, we're going to try to give you a sense of what we think digital transformation means, not just as a buzzword, but what it means to deliver it for real. Now, because of all the hopes and anxieties in the market, organizations around the globe are all chasing after digital transformation. And there's no shortage of quick fixes and prescriptions that are going to drive wonderful outcomes. It's going to be a miracle. It's going to be great. You know what it's not going to be? It's not going to be straightforward. The reality is, as somebody who's been in this industry for more than three decades, I've never seen more confusion, more chaos, and more bullshit than I see in the current markets, and that I see people grasping for quick solutions and hopes that somehow out of this chaos will emerge a coherent, sensible whole that will connect you to your customers, automate your operations, make everything work. I know that we all were born out of primordial soup, right? So there's some evidence that over, some period of time that you can go from like mush to actually outcomes that, hopefully make sense. But there's no evidence that any business today can survive that level of evolution without really thinking about what they're doing. And what I find is interesting, and this has some like computer boxes on it, but this is not a technical part of my presentation, right? This is a presentation about well-intentioned humans making dreadful mistakes, avoidable mistakes, understandable mistakes. And if I can be successful in the next 5 or 10 minutes, I will perhaps give you some insight as to how we see these mistakes, frankly, happening over and over and over again as people desperately try to emerge from this chaos and frankly find that they get subsumed into it again and again every couple of years. First mistake. Everyone talks about how they want to love their customer, how they want to be organized in a way that is central. Customers are central. We're going to take good care of our customers. We're going to really, really deliver. And then what they actually do is organize their businesses and organize their thinking around channels. Now, if you are Uber and the only place you're coming to market is through a mobile device, you don't have that conflict. But if you're a heritage business, I prefer that to either traditional or legacy. If you're a heritage business that actually has multiple channels and believe your customers might get some benefit and see some differentiation because of those channels, that's fatal. This poison comes in the most innocent of terms. Mobile first. Well, if you think mobile first, you go out there and you build a beautiful mobile app and you code into the mobile app the business logic about how you want to deal with that client. The business logic, the decisions, the types of screens you go through, what you do differently if the person is a minor versus an adult, if they have a guardian, if they have a good reputation or a bad reputation, that logic, whatever you might think, finds its way into those little zeros and ones, that computer code, that Java that's sitting on the phone. And you can build, and many are, the world's most brilliant microservices architecture that sounds like it's going to really revolutionize everything. But if the logic lives in a channel, when you then have people who are going to the web, how are you going to create a coherent experience for them? If you have a contact center or a branch, an ATM if you're a bank, how do you create a coherent experience if the brain lives in the channel? And when people buy these Salesforce systems and these other systems, they completely miss the reality of coding in the channel as being something that ossifies the business, that ensures that the next generations are not going to be better than the former ones, that locks you into channel thinking, right? Which is sometimes reflected in organizations. We talk about the web guys over there. Sometimes is just reflected in the products you buy and build, but is never reflected in organizations that really think about the customer. So if that's kind of mistake number one, I see some nodding here. I'm sure it's not happened in any of your organizations, but you've read about it, right? That people have built these channel-oriented systems. So then the second thing is, people really want automation. We want to put robots everywhere because we know that robots will fix all the arcane sort of elements of our business. And this is also an example where words matter, because the guys who sell robots, and by the way, we're one of them, but we don't describe it this way, they talk about robotic process automation, as if somehow these robots, which years ago we used to call screen scraping, they copy things from one screen to another, these robots are somehow going to manage your end-to-end processes. But it's ludicrous. At its face, you look at it, the robots, where they do make sense, in lots of cases they don't, but where they do make sense, what these robots are doing is they're doing tasks. And the task automation may be slightly cost-effective in some cases, but it's not going to connect what you're trying to achieve for your customer in some sort of contact sense all the way to execution. It's just wrong. And the result of this is that when organizations go to market, they find that their customer engagements, the way they touch their customers, don't actually have the ability to drive through to the end. And we call the hole in the middle, dun, 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 the digital gap. And business after business, finds that they fall into the digital gap, and they can't actually deliver on all the shiny promises and terrific elements that they might want to do. It's interesting, when I look at this picture and the silos that are created, the silos in the front office, silos in the back office, that are created by this type of thinking, it's not a technical problem, it's a way of thinking problem. And we came to a revelation 6 years ago. We came to the revelation that you weren't going to solve this problem by thinking from the touch point in, from the channel in, and you weren't going to solve the problem by building the miracle ERP system that was going to somehow come up, or enterprise service buses or microservices that was somehow going to go up and solve all of this. That there was something fundamentally missing from this picture. And when something's fundamentally missing, it's kind of like, when people thought the Earth was flat, they were missing this gravity thing around the sun. When you're missing something fundamental, you need to think differently about how you want to bridge the gap. And what we came to understand, and what we're here to talk to you about, is the idea of having a brain capable of determining logic, next best action, knowing what's appropriate, that can influence the different channels, but is not coded into them, that can help you go and understand how someone can start in one channel, move to another, how to get a consistent and coherent experience. But having a brain is great. And by the way, some of our customers think of us as just providing a brain. But a brain to us without the ability to execute is kind of like one hand clapping. What we say is you need a way to do the muscle, the execution that goes along with that brain, to be able to go, and just like the brain can infuse itself into the different channels, you want to be able to drive workflows and processes across the back-end systems, and you want to be able to have this thing in the middle that defines the work. The work in terms of the data you need to do the work, which needs to be normalized compared to any individual system, so you're really thinking about the work in terms of its pure essence. What does it take when I finish a piece of work? What have I gathered? What have I evaluated? And a brain that can operate on that and insinuate it into the different channels. Now, there needs to be this element in your architecture that enables you to think differently about where you define your business logic, your business rules, and your execution paradigm, and manage it. Now, when people look at this, they say, well, this is interesting. It would appear that it seems to be something that could live here in the middle, and from a middle out point of view could give you a lot of control and understanding. But we live in a real world. We live in a world where we want to be able to deliver results in 60, 90, 120 days. And that's where we came up with the idea that the whole way to pull this off is not to pull this off as one massive rewrite. By the way, when somebody comes in and tells you that they're going to put a customer service center in and rip out your call center, that is a massive rewrite. That is all the joy that Siebel promised. We know how that turned out. It turns out the same way these days, right? The whole point here, we think, is not to rip stuff out, but to be able to go one journey, or micro journey as we sometimes call it, at a time. So if somebody wants to do an address change, which a lot of people think is really pretty simple, but is actually a little complicated in some businesses, because you need to be able to smart about fraud and other sorts of issues. You need to drive that with the brain. You need to be able to execute it across multiple back-end systems. Those systems could include third parties, maybe a loyalty program you're synced with. They might not all be there. They might not all be up at the right instance. Being able to manage that end to end, being able to insinuate that into the customer experience in different channels, being able to handle different diverse systems, but have the logic be the same because it's normalized as it comes in and out of the middle. That gives you a lot of power to get things done that are complicated in a pretty quick fashion. Or at the end of the address change, you might want to take another step. You might want to send an SMS message. You might want to be able to confirm that this really was the person who said that they were when they issued the address change, or it's a perfect time for cross-sell and upsell. Connecting the brain to both the execution and the follow-up provides an enormous amount of power. Or take something like opening an account. You want to be able to let somebody start in the web channel, the digital channel, working on it. But maybe they get bored, they get frustrated, they have a question. You'd like them to be able to walk into one of your physical locations. You want those people, or the call center, to be able to pick it up exactly where it was, right? No loss of context. And that middle, being able to put that rules and that context together, being able to drive that through an execution. Now, I know that this is not a fantasy because here in Australia, you're going to be hearing from Commonwealth Bank of Australia. Commonwealth Bank has done amazing things. They drive over 20 million customer conversations a day, running in more than a dozen channels. Being able to make that a coherent whole and something that's been very successful for them. And what's interesting about this is we've tried to change the way that people think about the problem, not just in terms of from the middle out, but in terms of what it means to capture an end-to-end set of business processes. So I started Pega, God forbid, 34 years ago, with the vision that the way we wrote computer software, because I was a software architect and engineer, was a little primitive for the 1980s. Because in the 1980s, computers were getting faster. I mean, who would have imagined how fast they were getting? They were, we could have like 1/4 megabyte of memory. We could have, it was just amazing how powerful these machines, these DEC VAXs and IBM CICS, just mind-numbingly fast compared to what they were before. And we asked the question, me and my co-founders, why are we still programming by having humans take business requirements and translate them into the language of the machine? Why are we going and taking these requirements and then doing functional and technical analysis and data flow diagrams and then typing cryptic words into text files in languages like C# and PL1 and compiling them and then going back to the users and see if we got it right? And we had the idea that something that was a revolution in manufacturing might also apply to software. That revolution was something called CAD/CAM, computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing, where people stopped building cars out of clay and they began drawing them on computers and connecting those computers to the very manufacturing process. Today we have 3D printers even that can take what you do and actually let you play with it, change it, and realize it. We said software inevitably has to go this way. So why don't we see if we can create a model that elevates the discussion so that business people can be a core part of it. And from that model, which would live in a database, our system would make it just a much easier way for people to talk about what they were doing and understand what they were doing and really get started. But we made a horrible mistake. We, like pretty much everybody else in the area called business process management, started out by believing that everything was a process. Process first. And I'll tell you why that was a mistake, because it doesn't sound wrong, and certainly processes are important. But the reason it was a mistake is that practically, when we would get one of our customers in a room, and we would ask them to define their processes, particularly end-to-end processes related to a customer, they would begin fighting within 10 minutes. You'd put like craft paper up on a wall the size of the screen, big craft paper, and begin drawing little boxes and decision shapes and all of these other things. Then somebody would say, no, I don't do it that way. In this channel, we do it some other way. And they say, well, we got this customer segment, and the customer segment we have to do something special for. And then the process got really long and super complicated with lots of branches and lots of elements. And then sometimes people would say, well, let's break this off and create a sub-process. But if you're in the sub-process, you never knew if you had the data. So every sub-process would re-get the same data over and over again. Now, if you could draw one of these things and put it into our system, we could do a brilliant job of automating it. It was a little hard to understand, and it was certainly hard to get there. So we changed our thinking. And we said, what instead of thinking of everything being a process, we thought about the outcomes that we wanted to achieve. And an outcome, like in this case, an account origination loan, it turns out that it kind of has something that organizes the processes. And we chose to call this is a life cycle of a case, is what we call it. It's got these major statuses, these major state changes that it goes through that will organize the work. And what we found is this got that initial conversation, which was like hours of violence, to like 5 minutes of everyone agreeing, yeah, these are the major stages you go through. Because you can actually go look at the actual loans. You can figure out what are the big steps they go through, what data do they have when they enter one of these stages, what's required, what's optional. You can figure that out pretty easily from the artifacts. And then something really interesting happens. The processes and the decisions all get kind of small. They're just aimed to move you to the next stage. And in addition to getting small, they get reusable, so that you're in a position where the same thing can actually be used in a variety of places, particularly if you make the data retrieval automatic. If you say, we got a computer here that can figure things out, let's not make the people go get the data themselves. Let's just tell them what the data is, and the computer will figure out if it needs it. This idea of moving to an outcome, or what we call often a case, a piece of work orientation that sits in the middle, frees you from a lot of those vagaries of those systems that you have in the front end or those systems you have in the back end, because it gives you a place to think about the work itself. And then you can think about, how do I do that most efficiently, most rapidly, with the fewest touch points? If I need a robot, I can pull the robot in just to do one of these little steps. I don't pull the robot in to try to manage this whole thing. I can actually manage everything in a coherent and organized fashion. But to do this, we found there was something missing. And what's missing is something that humans take for granted, but computer systems really suck at. And that's dimensionality. If I were defining something for you, and I were to tell you, you know, this is something we want to do in the region, but in New Zealand, it needs to be different, you would be able to instantly in your mind integrate the standard way of doing something with the things that needed to be specialized. It's just one of the things people are great at. But computer systems aren't. They make you put decision diagrams in or make copies of stuff. So we built a concept of dimensionality into the definition, so that anything you define, you can override based on, for example, type of product. Is it a residential versus a commercial loan? Type of customer. Is it my regular customer, some special customer, a very risky customer? Or jurisdiction. Is this something that would apply to all of Australia or just one of the states? You can override, but still have the computer figure out how to bring it together. What we found is that that way of thinking about outcomes, thinking about processes being small, and actually putting it into the honest-to-God development environment, because this is what our development environment actually looks like. It looks exactly like the way I've been describing what we do, drives home not just new technology, but a better way of thinking about the problem in terms of outcomes and from the middle out. And being able to define and have business people participate in the definition of what they want their outcomes to be, how they want it to work, hiving off the bits, the 20% that really is more technical, like where does the data live, from the 80% that business people should be able to take and control, we found that this is kind of a revolutionary way of going forward. And we call this software that writes your software. Think of it as CAD/CAM for the way you want your business to run. And a cool outgrowth of this is something that we call cloud choice, which is because of this, you can either, and I was talking to a couple of customers here who are using us on Pega Cloud, where we provide a fully managed service. You don't have to know what we're doing. But the cloud is one of those things that's still changing. People talk about it sometimes, I think, like it's a place where miracles happen. But in reality, a lot of evolution still to happen and a lot of questions still to come. We believe in giving our clients choice. So the idea that if you have a model and you're generating the software that actually runs, that, well, in our case today, we can generate for 4 clouds. The Pega Cloud, for the Google Cloud Platform, for something called Pivotal for people who want to run their own clouds, or for Microsoft Azure. To give customers choice, and you know what's really cool about this, and we call this future-proof technology? If a 5th choice comes out 2 years, 3 years from now that really looks like it makes sense, we can just generate for that. So that's something that provides, I think, an enormous amount of power to get out of this technical buzzword chaos, where you have debates between Node.js and Angular and React as to whether it's going to be the next miracle. Guarantee you what, it's not the final miracle. You need to be able to define your business and organize your pictures in ways that prepare you for miracles you may not even know about. And being able to do that also lets you incorporate AI in some very pragmatic ways. You'll hear in the presentations today about what we call the customer decision hub. That's that thing, that brain that makes those recommendations, keeps them omni-channel, makes them smart. We also have something called workforce intelligence, which I will confess is a little creepy, because it lets you install a little robot on people's desktops, and it watches what they do, shoots it up to the cloud, does event correlation, and actually figures out where people are doing things that are time wasters, where they're cutting and pasting things between screens that we should be able to do or one of our robots should be able to do. And you can depersonalize it so you don't actually have the individual's name. So it's less creepy in that case. Here, and that's, by the way, required in certain countries where you're not actually allowed to report on the individual. But the other really cool thing we can do is the application of AI to the performance of the system itself. The system is constantly putting out alerts when it notices that things are slow, things are getting slower, things might be suboptimal. And we now suck these up into the cloud, also do analysis on them, compare them to what we see from our other clients, and can make very specific recommendations to warn people about opportunities or risks that they might be encountering in the system. So having an architecture like this really gives you a lot of flexibility in being able to apply AI without that being something foreign and outside, with that something that's really a central part of it. And I would say the last significant concept I want to talk about is another buzzword that I think falls into a lot of categories, but I actually think is a really important one. And that is the concept of design thinking. So people use design thinking to talk about everything from how you should envision a supply chain to a city. We tend to use it in a more structured and tangible way, which is if you want to bring these micro journeys or these improvements to your customer base, if you want to organize a project to be able to do something, to offer a new product to your client, or be able to take something that used to take 2 weeks to approve a loan down to a day or 20 minutes. How do you want to think about that? And what we found is that there are 3 key sort of legs of the stool that if you think about it this way, let the business people organize what they want to do in a way that makes conversations with technical people and conversations with their management very, very effective. And you can do this whether you're using Pega or not, though all of the tooling to manage it this way is built into our system and built into the way we develop. The first is you should think in terms of what are the journeys that are important to you. Or I sometimes like to use the term micro journeys, because we're not talking about journey as it reflects to the 20-year life of a customer with their telco. We're talking about journey, as the person's going to Bulgaria and doesn't want to get socked with roaming charges, right? We're talking about micro journeys here, which we often refer to as cases or strategies about how you make a particular decision about what to offer. And that sort of grounds you in terms of what your options are about what you might do. But then the next dimension is the personas. All right, who are the people and the channels that are doing this? Because if you have somebody who's, for example, calling to see if a payment was applied to their account, that experience is going to be, it should be the same micro journey, but there are elements of that experience that are going to be different if they're doing it on the website, if they're calling a contact center, if we intercept them in the voice response unit, because we know they're probably calling because they just applied a payment, and we tell them to make it so the call never comes into the contact center. Being able to understand those personas and the channels puts a taste or a flavor on those journeys that makes them really, really clear. And then the third element is the data. What data will I want to pull in to evaluate this? And what do I want to keep in what we call the case? Because a lot of things that people miss sometimes is when we're doing work, particularly in regulated industries, you need to keep a record of how you came to your decisions. And being able to do that, being able to show a year later, hey, this is how we made that decision, both can feed into machine learning, but also protect you from people saying that certain decisions were questionable, particularly if they're guided by the machine and you have the right records. So these things together are what we refer to as Pega Infinity, the latest generation of our software, which we launched at PegaWorld in June this year. You've heard about PegaWorld, marvelous. Love to see all of you there. And it consists of these 6 core elements, right? In terms of technology, real-time omni-channel AI, the brain, the muscle, the end-to-end automation and robotics, having a rational way to implement it, being able to do these micro journeys one at a time and link them across from front to back. Having that layer cake, that dimensionality, which makes it possible to organize your thinking so you can find it, you can see it, you can change it. And then really automating the software writing itself, which gives important elements like cloud choice to organizations. Now, we think we're onto something really terrific. And for those of you who are on this path with us, we really appreciate it. I will tell you that we are highly rated by analysts. Now, I would also tell you I would never buy anything because of the Gartner and Forrester ratings. Well, I mean, we do really well, so I'd like to put it up. But the reality is, when these companies put stuff up, when they rate a particular sector, they're rating companies of all sizes and all complexities. I mean, it's really kind of an odd average. It doesn't necessarily fit with anyone. But the good news is we're really considered at the leading edge, and we have one architecture. We're not some Frankenstack of technologies that were, you guys know about Frankenstein here? All right, that was the monster out of dead people sewed together. So a Frankenstack is the monster lots of people buy, which is dead software companies sewed together. And look, you can make the PowerPoints look brilliant and identical, but architecture counts. That's one of the things we believe. And I will tell you, actually, the two of these pictures are about to be republished literally in the next 2 weeks. And we even look staggeringly better than we do today. So feel free to go to our website and read our propaganda on these topics. So, the good news is Pega is in the business of doing real things for real companies that want to do real transformation for their real customers. And, we have not historically been an enormously well-known company. It's been a great pleasure for the last 20 years to be in Australia, and we're very committed to this space, and we continue to grow. But I'll just tell you, Pega as a firm, we're doing terrifically. We're publicly traded, but privately controlled. So you don't really have to worry that one of these bone collectors or Frankenstack guys is going to come grab us, though God knows we get lots of interest. But I think that's very contrary to what our culture is. We really like doing real things for organizations. And at the heart, the mission of the firm as we articulate it today is really very coherent with where we were when we started. And it's really entirely about changing, about democratizing the way organizations can use software. And that, to me, we've had the privilege of building a 4,600 person company. We're on $1 billion cash run rate now, doing well. But ultimately, what's really important to me is seeing our clients successful and seeing that they have the ability to solve tangible problems, but not run into the walls or the chaos that is so common. It's a privilege to work with many of you. I look to reacquainting and meeting many new folks today. And thank you very much for coming.